And welcome, Julia. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
I'm really looking forward to this chat. I know that prior to hitting record, I heard a little bit of your story and I'm already in awe. So let's get started with where in the world are you from and what is your background?
I'm from a super tiny little town, Saskatchewan called Wymark. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. There's like 12 streets, maybe a couple hundred people. Really, really tiny town. There was a school, a mailbox that was a part of someone's house, and a skating rink. And that's where I grew
Whoa.
up for most of my until grade 12. I lived there. And then I moved into Swift Current and then kind of all over. But that's where I really grew up. Yeah.
Okay, that's a small, tiny town. I think that it really paints a picture that the mailbox was attached to someone's house.
Yeah.
Got it. I
Yeah,
know
you'd
that
have to like
town.
go in and ring the bell and they'd come from their living room and see what you needed. It's a whole
Right.
thing.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, I love it. Okay, well, all right. So we know that you are a tough small town girl. So, when about did the story begin for you that we are going to jump straight into?
Mhm.
Approximately what age, what was going on for you? And let's talk a little bit about how you turned your pain to power.
Awesome. Well, I got married in 2013, and then I'll jump right to 2019. And um, so I had been married for however many years that is. And my dad, I hadn't heard from him from a few days. And I remember texting my brother and sister and saying, like, have you heard from dad? This is weird. Can't get a hold of him. And this had kind of been a typical scenario only because he was an alcoholic. And there were times when he would go on binge drinking, whatever, and wouldn't answer his phone, but his phone would always be dead. And this time it was still going to voicemail. And so I was like, it feels a little different than it normally did. And we had decided to wait a day or two to see if he would get in touch with us. And something in my gut just knew that that wasn't the right thing to do. Something was wrong. And so I called the police station in Swift Current, which is where he was living at the time. And they did a wellness check on him. And it had turned out that he had fallen down his flight of stairs in his home and he was lying dead on the floor at the bottom. And so later that day, one of the police officers here in Saskatoon came to my house and said, sat me down and did the whole thing. And I remember watching them pull up to my house and thinking, this can't be real because they only come to your house if like your loved one was like in a war or in the military or like, from the movies and whatever. That's what I had experienced. But
Right.
I knew in my gut this person was for me. Um, and so, yeah, he had passed away. And it's very suddenly, very obviously, unexpectedly. And that kind of jump started the last 5 years of chaos in my life.
Wow. I'm just so sorry for your loss. That is
Thank you.
a very drastic way to lose someone that you love, who
Mhm.
had a lot of demons. But that
Mhm.
being said, that doesn't make a difference on the insurmountable loss that was
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of healing and struggle going through even just that section of my story because it is such an odd way to
Mhm.
pass. It really took me a long time to wrap my mind around that death isn't always cancer or a car crash. It can just be as simple or as like crazy as falling down a flight of stairs. That really got me for a long time. It was really hard. I actually got PTSD from that um, thing that happened, that event. And for a long time, I counted when I was on steps. I would have to count in my head how many steps there were. And now I have severe anxiety, but um, if I start counting steps, I know that my anxiety has been ramping and I need to like really focus in and see what I need to shift up because that's one of my signs, one of my things that I need to watch out for now. Which just
Yeah,
seems so silly to a lot of people, but when you go through something like that, it really jolts you.
of
Yeah.
course. Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine that it wouldn't. You're right. When I first heard that, I was like stairs, really? Like it was
Yeah.
so different. Okay. So what happened next in your story? You suffered this terrible loss. How did your family and yourself, what was going on for you?
Yeah. So that was in March. So exactly a year ago this month, or 5 years ago this month. And I love picking words for the year every year. And so that year my word was joy. And then my dad died. And I was like, joy, really? Like,
Oh
how can
no.
that be my word for this year? And so I had a choice to make. And I could either say I heard wrong, joy is not my word, I'm getting rid of it, using something else, or I could really lean in and say, I'm going to seek after joy. And that's what I chose to do. So I started not right away. I grieved for years and years, but I chose to focus in on joy and really find those joy points wherever I could. And easier said than done, right? When you're dealing with
Of
that.
course.
But on top of that, I was also dealing with an abusive marriage. And that was the year that really opened my eyes to how bad it was. I think I was living in a, well, this is just the way marriage is and this is totally normal before then. And then once I saw how he was treating me during processing my dad's divorce, it really, really opened my eyes to the chaos and crazy that was happening in my home. So I had two young girls at the time already.
Hmm.
And um, when my youngest daughter has some disabilities, and at the time we weren't sure what was the cause, what the diagnosis was, what was going on. So we were doing lots of testing and things like this. And one of the doctors was looking into a certain diagnosis, but it would have been caused by a car accident, falling, trauma as a child kind of thing, or like as a baby. And I called my then husband at work and said, this is what they're looking into. This is so weird. What's going on? And he came home from work and said, I have to tell you something. And he told me that he had shaken our baby girl when she was a few months old. She cried a lot and he got frustrated and shook her in her crib. And that was one of the final moments for me. I just thought, how can I ever stay married to a person that could do this to another human being? Like, and when you're in an abusive marriage or a relationship, not even marriage, just relationship, it's very easy to think, oh, but when it's good, it's good. It's just
Hmm.
the few bad times, or, at least it's me, it's not the kids, so I can take it, I can handle it. I've got to be strong for the family. And something in me, when I realized it was extending down to the children, I said no more. And that was the beginning of the end of our marriage. So by 2020, May of 2020, he was out of the house. And it took, I mean, I could go really deep into that. And it's so hard to leave an abusive relationship, as many of your followers will know, I'm sure. Um, I kicked him out, he came back in, social services was involved, this happened, that happened. And I'm thankful that it didn't take longer than the few months it did, because sometimes it takes years, and I get that. But May of 2020, the pandemic started, and then he was out of the house, and I was a single mom, and it was crazy. Yeah.
Wow. That was not that long ago that you lost your father, your marriage, you found out that your baby had been shook. My goodness. Like
Mhm.
what? Wow. And now it's COVID and you're by yourself with all of these things and children to take care of.
Mhm.
That's a huge amount of weight.
Yeah, it felt like just waiting for the next shoe to drop at all times by that point, because it was like, okay, this happened, now this happened, now this happened. And I was very much in a headspace that was not helpful at the time, because I was just living in that negative, like, survival mode. Got to get through the day, taking care of two young kids, being a single mom. And at the same time, like within the same couple months of my then husband leaving. Um, I was working for a church at the time that was going through just a chaotic mess. And it was really hurtful. And I had a big meeting with them, and I could not, with integrity, continue to work at their place. So I was then all of a sudden a single mom that had no job and
Wow.
trying to leave a very controlling person who wasn't ready to let go. It was very, very challenging, to say the least.
Okay. No
Mhm.
kidding. Julia, I'm curious about the faith piece. When you say you were working at a church, did you have a strong faith then?
Yeah, I grew up a Christian, so I've always loved God. At that time, I had been working for the church for a while. My then husband had continually, he had to take care of the kids on Sunday mornings when I was up there singing. And so he wasn't a huge fan because it was like a burden on him that he had to take care of the kids. And so I would say, well, I can quit and then I can, and he'd be like, no, no. And it was this piece. Anyways, um, I had a strong faith, but my faith has grown and changed and gone so much deeper now than it was then. I've never like wavered in do I or don't I believe. But at that time, I
Hmm.
would say I was very much just coasting because I was just,
Hmm.
again, in that survival mode.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did things begin to shift for you?
So we were separated for a couple of years, and our divorce took so long. And part of that was because during our many, many appointments with lawyers and mediation and all the things, he then hit my oldest child who came home one day, and because I would keep them all the time and he would visit them. He would take them out of the house for afternoon visits and stuff. And she came into the house yelling, "Daddy hit me."
Oh
And
my God.
I said, "What?" And he came into the house and told me that he had. And so I called the cops that night, and he was arrested, eventually charged with 2 counts of assault. And that took many months. And so while that whole thing was going on, our divorce stuff was just on hold because we had to deal first with the assault charges and probationary period of when he could see the girls again and all of that. And it was too much to think of both things at the same time.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So after that had all been figured out, then we got back to the divorce proceedings with our lawyers. And during that time, I remember asking my lawyer, I was like, am I allowed to start dating? Like, is this like against the rules? Because growing up a Christian, in a lot of scenarios, that is against the rules or like not, it's kind of looked down upon. And so my
Right.
lawyer was like, no, you get out there. Like, if you want to start dating, like, you do your thing. And that was kind of like a wake up moment. I was like, I don't have to be stuck here. Like, I can, I'm in control of who I am, kind of thing. And
Mm.
I went onto a dating website or like a dating app or whatever it was. And the very first person I matched with was my now ex-husband's best friend. And I was like, emergency delete. No, thank you. Not doing this. Like, this is
Oh
not
my
how I'm
goodness.
going to spend my time. It was like, now it's hilarious. But at the time I was like, are you kidding me? Like, will I never get out of this realm of people?
Right.
So that was kind of my intro back into real life. And I just decided then and there, I was like, okay, God, if I am going to get remarried, if I'm going to move on from this, if there is someone out there for me, like, great. If I am going to be a single mom forever, great. I will figure it out. But I decided then and there that if I was going to date someone, then they would have to come with like referrals from my friends. Like, it had to be someone who was already known by people that I knew I
Yeah.
could trust, because obviously I was going to have some big trust issues, as you can imagine. And there was just
Right.
a lot of things that I was like, okay, this has to kind of line up in this way in order for me to really trust that this can happen. And so in 20, let me figure out these dates. in January of 22, one of my friends who I'd known from like 15 years prior, 10 years prior, he was going through a divorce. And I just reached out and said, man, I'm with you. I'm so sorry. Like, let me know if you ever want to talk about it. And we hadn't connected in years, but from that day forward, we never stopped talking. And so now we're married. So it turned out
Oh,
really amazingly. Yeah.
that is really beautiful. That is really, really beautiful. And it started all with you reaching out and saying, hey, I mean, if you need any help, like that's a really wonderful way to begin a relationship.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. His divorce was not that I won't share any of his story, but it was very quick. Like it happened not
Mhm.
easily.
Of
Divorce is never easy, but it happened simply for
course.
them. They didn't have children or anything like that.
Right.
Um, and so I think his divorce was done by like May or something. And I was still, I was 3 or 4 years into my process, but I still wasn't technically divorced. So it
Yeah.
was a whole, it was a whole thing. So we started dating in April of that year. April 1st, we started dating. April 15th, I sent him my ring size. June, he ordered the ring. September, we were engaged. And then January 6th of 2023, we got married.
That's so great. That's
Yeah,
really exciting. I
yeah,
love
it
that.
is.
I
And,
love
he
that.
came with great referrals. Like, because I had met him, we actually met at a Bible camp many, many years prior. And he's a musician, I'm a musician. And he just checked all the boxes in the ways of like, even things like my ex-husband had sexually assaulted me many, many times. And so going into a new relationship, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to want sex again. Like this
Mhm.
is just something that I don't know enough about myself or enough about, like I had only ever been with my ex-husband. And so that was the only really thing that I knew about it. Um, and so that when I was dating my now husband, I was very open and honest with him. And he, in a previous marriage, had dealt with a similar situation where there was trauma in his wife. And he eventually had just said, I don't want to hurt you in this way. So we'll just not have sex and that's okay. And so when he came to me and he was like, I've done it before, I can do it again. Like, it's okay. We can figure it out as we go and we'll just grow together and work through stuff together. And it was such a safe space immediately for me to be just seen in that way and
Mhm.
known in that way so deeply, like right off the bat. It was really, really incredible. And there was just every little piece like that fit together so well. So I'm so, so thankful.
Wow. He sounds kind to his core.
Oh, he is. He truly, truly is.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So your story started 2019, and I'm not going to say the word ended because there's no such thing. But began to kind of tie into a bow, somewhere around 2022. So that's a long time. What were some of the things that you started implementing into your life? What were some of the ways that you got through your experiences? What were some of your favorite tools?
Yeah. There was so many different things that I leaned into. I think one of the first things that I got curious about was my faith. I really got honest with myself because when I left my then husband, I had a lot of Christians telling me divorce is wrong. You can't get divorced. God hates that,
Mm,
like
hmm.
pray through it. And I so do not believe that God wants abused people in relationships, like in
Hmm.
the abusive relationship. I just do
Yeah.
not believe that. And so I got really serious with my faith and I just said, okay, do I believe or don't I? And
Hmm.
does my God look different than their God who's telling me I'm going to hell because I just got divorced? Like, what is that about?
Yeah.
So the first thing I really did was just really take a good look at what I believed and who God is and who God says I am. And my prayer life expanded like crazy because I got really honest with God. I had never like yelled at the skies or like, it was up until that point I had prayed, but it was generally like, thank you, God, for this food. Amen. you know, and at that
Right.
point, I really got serious. Like, why am I here? What is the purpose of this? I don't want to go through this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I
Mhm.
began to understand that he can handle the big questions. He's a big guy, and um, he's so much bigger than the box so many Christians put him in. And so
Yeah.
that was the first thing that I did. I also saw a divorce coach, which was so helpful because my brain was so not in a good spot. I was just really disorganized and all over the place, couldn't focus on what needed to be done. And she really helped me figure out the next steps and discern for myself what was best for me and my girls, and um, helped me process a lot. Like, coaches are different than counselors, but she really helped me process a lot of what was going on. And I think because that piece was so close to the death piece of my father, there was just a lot to work through. And the stuff that I had mentioned earlier with the church that I left, the pastor of that church had really hurt a lot of people, and me included. And so, um, in a way, it was like my dad, my husband, my pastor, all men. I was like,
Mhm.
you know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah,
there's
I
just a
do.
lot to work through on so many different levels. My divorce coach, yeah, she really helped me work through. And then I've done a lot of counseling, obviously, a lot of like inner healing work. I've read a lot of books. I've, done the work because you can't just sit there. You can't just, I mean, you can sit there and process for your entire life if you want to. But I knew that I wanted to move forward and get healthy and figure it out. And I'm still figuring a lot of the pieces out, but
Mm.
definitely come a long way than what I was a couple years ago.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
curious. This isn't, part of my typical questions that I ask, but curious if you believe in the term time heals, in
Hmm.
as a standalone sentence.
That's such a good question. I don't think so. I think things get easier with time.
Mm,
You can distance yourself well with time, but it doesn't do the healing for you.
I agree.
That's something that, yeah, yeah, that's healing is a whole different thing. Do you
Mhm.
know the box analogy with grief? That's like my favorite one, where the button is in the middle of the box and it's like hitting all the corners. And at first, grief seems so big because it keeps hitting all the corners of the box. And eventually, time expands that box. So the grief ball, hits less of the trigger points, if that makes sense. But the grief is still there and you can't heal that with time. I don't think.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that analogy. I've never actually heard it, but it makes so much sense. So when it hits the sides of the box, those are the moments where you that emotional pain comes
You
knocking. Is that
really
right?
feel it. Yeah.
The idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
And so as
amazing.
time expands it, the grief doesn't get smaller. You just
Yeah.
learn to live with it. And it's like those old screensavers where the thing just bounces around.
I do.
Yeah. To age us
Dating
both a little bit.
ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So true. I do remember watching that for a long time when I was a kid because it was so nifty.
Right. And you like wanted it to hit the corner.
Yes, you would wait until it hit the corner. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. That's so funny. Okay, so I digress.
Sorry.
That's great. So, I'm just thinking, I love how what I'm hearing as a theme here, Julia, is I'm hearing that over and over again, you kept making choices. Like you
Mm,
became an active participant in your healing. You got a counselor, you got a divorce coach, you quit your job, you started a new job, you found a new way of looking at faith. to me, what I'm hearing is you continually made choices for the better good of Julia. And
Hmm.
not everybody takes that route. So,
Hmm.
I really want to honor what you did, because it's not an easy thing to do, number one.
Hmm.
But you did it in such a beautiful way. You took your experiences and you have this beautiful marriage now, and I know that you're speaking on stages, and also want to hear about your music a little bit too, because I know that that's got to play in there somewhere, for how it evolved, your music. So
Hmm.
let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Um, I started writing music when I was like 15 or 16. I put out my first album in 2012. My parents were divorced. Like I said, my dad was an alcoholic. So there was a lot of music that came out of that. And then with his death and the divorce, my daughter being diagnosed with life altering things and dealing with all of that at the same time. And then, like you said, making these decisions, these choices for myself. Um, in 2021, my word of the year was play. And I had just decided enough of the darkness. I need to start playing with my life again, playing with creativity, playing with my girls more, just getting back into my body and into movement and all of those things. And so, as part of that year, I put out my first EP in many years, and it's entitled Bloom. And it's
What is an
six
EP?
songs. An EP, it's just a short, it's not a full length album. So, it's not 12 songs, it's six. It's just
Gotcha.
like a shortened, yeah. EPs can be like 3 songs, 6 songs, whatever.
I
Yeah.
love it.
So it's 6 songs, and they're all songs that were created from those hard years of my life. And it was so fun to make. I worked with the producer Lana Winterholt out in Winnipeg, and so it was still like COVID times when it was like sometimes COVID and sometimes not, and how all of that happened.
Yeah. How could we
And so we
forget?
did. Right, yeah. And so some of it I did in my closet in my rental suite out of, we had to sell our home and all of this stuff. And so I had gotten me and the girls into this little place, and I was like huddled in my closet. She was recording me from Winnipeg on my computer through the magic of technology I still don't understand. And yeah, it was phenomenal. And then so on top of doing that kind of music stuff, I'm also a worship leader. And so I sing, if you don't know what that is, or if people listening don't know what that is, at church on Sundays or at events, Christian events, I will lead us in worship and into the presence of God. And it's so that in itself is just a healing, beautiful, honoring, like it's the best thing that I do with my time and with my life is worshiping by myself in my house or leading others into worship, being in worships, like anywhere. Um, yeah, that's been a huge, huge part of my story. And even when I am in a darker place or I don't feel like God is great all the time, or I feel like I don't understand the big picture of things. In those moments in the past few years when I have dove into worship, those are the times where I have experienced the most healing and the most um, just moments of being seen and loved.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's
Hmm.
beautiful. I've always been, a motivator for, if you feel that there's something beyond yourself, putting your faith in that.
Mm-hmm.
And because I know that it truly got me through my experiences, having something beyond myself, knowing that there was a reason, that really made a huge difference for me. And
Yeah.
so it sounds to me that it has been for you. So when it comes to your music and when it comes to your in-person worship, were you doing things like that in 2019, maybe 2021, or was it more that as a result of all those experiences, you're like, no, I'm gonna move into these things that, maybe I was maybe once nervous about or didn't know about, or or whatever else. I'm curious what was the transition of that?
Hmm. I was leading worship from age 15 till forever. But when my dad died, I took like obviously I took a few weeks off because that was
Mhm.
my job at the time. And then everything went down with my church and I quit. And I
Mm,
because it was COVID, I didn't even attend church for a while. I didn't stop believing, but I was just like, I
mhm,
don't have the time or the energy to put into the rules and regulations and whatever else is going on day to day,
mhm,
again, just survival mode. I needed to just get us up and fed, and that was all I could do. So for a long time, that was it. That was just at home. And then in 2021 in the summer, so about a year later, um, my brother invited me to his church, and they were going through this hot topics thing. And they said, ask a question and maybe we'll answer it next Sunday. And so I put my question in and I said, what are your thoughts on divorce, especially when there's abuse involved? And I came back the next Sunday and it was one of the 4 or 5 questions that they answered. And they said, if you're being abused, get out. Like, absolutely. And the way that they presented it was like, I could call this home. I could be welcomed here. I could belong here. I won't be judged here, which was a big
mhm.
thing for me after losing friendships and family members over the whole thing. And so I started going, but it was 6 or 9 months before I came forward saying, I would love to start being on worship team again. So from when my dad died till then, it was probably a year and a half, 2 years from when I stopped and then started back into it. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, that's just amazing. Well, Julie, you have been through the ringer, but you have come out in such a way. And what one thing we haven't even talked about is the fact that you've been speaking on stages and emceeing, events that are empowerment based and that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
so, really what I witness is that you've made a lot of very important choices in with the intentionality of healing not only yourself but the people around you, like in terms of
Mhm.
worship and these emceeing events and all these sorts of things, and sharing all your favorite books with us at the last event I thought was so
Yes.
cool, which are numerous. So yes, you have read a lot of books.
Yeah. Big reader.
Yeah, but no, and so that's so that it just really is very beautiful. And I hope that you see that too. All the work that you've done and how you've come out on top.
Thank you. Yeah. I really believe that there is such power in sharing your story. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned through all of the things I've gone through in the past 5 years is the power of sharing and opening yourself up, because it is so easy to think we're the only one that has ever gone through such a situation. And that's
Mhm.
just not the truth. Like, the amount of women I've been able to come alongside and just be a support for, or some people just need to be listened to. They just need someone to bounce things off of, or whatever it is. There's so much pain in the world that can be turned to beauty. And I just so strongly believe that there's such big power in that. And I don't think we walk through things just because that's our lot in life. Like, if we
Right.
go through something, there's a reason for it. And yeah, I want the reason to be something good. So, yeah.
Wow. And that is a choice you made.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, that you answered my last question, was what was the most powerful lesson your experiences have taught you?
Mm.
And so it is that, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
and so I guess my final question would be, how can people find your music? Because that is such a cool thing that you do. And I know I listen to you, so love everyone else to be able to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you can find me online anywhere you download or listen to music, Julia Dawn. The EP is called Bloom. And then on Instagram, I'm Julia Dawn Love. And that's where you'll find the explosion of other things that I'm involved in and I'm up to. Instagram's the hub for sure.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll link all that. thank you again for sharing your story and for giving us a little bit of a glimpse in what true grit really looks like.
Mm,
And also opening us up to this idea that there is a chance to be in worship in a place where you feel um, welcome, and I
mm,
think that's another
absolutely.
really powerful message to be added to today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having this conversation, having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.